Okay, we're going to continue with the lower posteriors. I did one side already, as you can see there, just to speed things up a little bit. But the process is the same, whether you do one side or the other. Okay, I'll show you how to start things off. So obviously we're going to introduce the second bicuspid. Just want to get a little more lighting here for the video. So we're going to introduce the second bicuspid, and as you can see from the other side, we have pretty good interdigitation between the teeth, or intercuspation. And that only happens when you select the proper mold that will fit up against the opposing. So selecting the mold, there's a number of things you got to consider. The size of the mold, obviously, and also the cuspal inclination of the mold. If we look at the cuspal inclination of the mold here, it's fairly shallow. Okay? It's got a lot of anatomy, I should say. And that should correspond nicely with the opposing. You're not going to get one that's just absolutely perfect, but something that's very close. Now, when you're setting up posterior teeth against natural posterior teeth, you have to set them up, as I did on this side, slightly higher than they need to be, so you can grind in the bite a little bit and still preserving most of the anatomy on the tooth. Okay? All right, so I'm going to start off with our second bicuspid right here. And once again, I'm going to tentatively hold it into position. And see how it fits. So that's where I want to go, but obviously the wire is in the way. And where do we grind now to compensate for that wire being in the way? So we have to go towards the distal of the first bicuspid, as well as be at a certain height so we can have this tooth slightly elevated into the bite, maybe 0.5 millimeter or so we can grind it in a little bit. That's a lot to ask all at once, but let's see. It's not impossible, it's just a little hard. Okay, so visually assess where you think you need to grind on the tooth. As I'm looking at it from my angle, this way, I see that I need to reduce the tooth at an angle this way. This way. Also, I need to reduce the ridge lap portion of the tooth, which is the underside of the tooth, to make it fit against the ridge. Maybe not so much. I'm going to leave that alone for now because I think I have some more room than I need between the model and the underside of the tooth. So I'm just going to start off by compensating for the wire. And from the looks of it, the wire looks at this angle. So I'm using a very small tapered burr. Some people might want to use a disc, but this burr works pretty good. Let's see how close I am to that. So I didn't grind as much as I wanted to. I just wanted to get an idea where I'm going with this. And it looks like I'm on the right spot. Lining up the buccal marginal ridges, the mesial marginal ridges. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to go a little bit more now. I'll open it up a little bit more on the inside. So you can see I've almost cut at an angle, diagonal through the tooth to compensate for the shape of the wire. Let's see if that fits any closer. It does, but you can see the mesial of the 5 does not touch the distal of the 4. So the wire is still in the way. Let's take a closer look to see what else is interfering. It's still the wire. I don't see anything else interfering with it. So take your time with this. You don't want to over grind around the wire because you're going to create a big space that's going to get filled in with pink acrylic, and that's not good. That's pretty good. I think I'm touching, and it looks like I'm at the right height. You probably can't see it on camera. I think I need to reduce a little bit more. Need to reduce a little bit more in here. And for good measure, even though I don't have to, I'm going to reduce a little bit on the underside of the tooth, just to roughen the tooth anyways. It might be a little premature spot right here. I felt like there was one, but let's see if that helps a little bit. Let's see, tentatively hold it into position. Still feel a little interference with a wire right about in here, so I'll switch back to the other burr. Just a little bit in here. Just to open it up a little bit more. Not so much at the marginal ridge, but more so below that. Let's see how this works now. And that feels that the tooth is butting right up against the natural tooth a whole lot nicer, closer anyhow. Okay, I think I'm close, but just to verify, put a little bit of wax again. Seal it down first so it adheres to the model. A little bit more on top. And then place my tooth in an ideal position to where I think it's going to be. Make sure you get the buccal slope angle, which means I got to come out a little bit. Got to add a little more wax on it. Sorry, just trying to get the camera angle correct. So it looks like the central fossa is lining up with 3-4, marginal ridges lining up, buccal ridges lining up, buccal cusp ridges lining up. Looks like the long axis is somewhat correct, but let's see. Let me just change that a little bit. So there's a lot of good things that have to come together. I'm still getting interference. Just where I thought I put the tooth in an ideal position, I'm still getting interference right there. So I need to grind that tooth just a little bit more, not too much. Right there. Let's see if that makes a difference. That looks pretty good. So I've grounded just enough from the tooth surface to go around that wire. I'm just going to soften up the wax around this tooth to get it into an ideal position. It's not there yet. You can clearly see that the long axis of 3-5 is somewhat tilted towards the distal, so I'm just going to correct the position of the tooth before I assess the tooth against the opposing. Wax is getting a little bit hard. Okay. Somewhat okay. Let's see how this relates to the opposing as I'm closing the articulator. Looks okay. Looks like I'm intercuspading fairly nicely. I got a bit of an opening with my bite. I'm going to move the tooth into a little more of a lingual position. Place my pin back on here now. Now I'm touching, but look at the pin. It's slightly open. I can't hear, you can't even see it on camera, but I can't hear it. So I need to have this tooth slightly elevated, just like that. So I lifted the tooth maybe 1/4 millimeter or so. I'm going to seal it down. And grind in the bite. I'm going to seal it down all the way around. Let the wax cool off completely. I might have overgrounded the tooth here a little bit, but nothing to worry about. Okay. Bring things together gently. Definitely the pin is slightly elevated off the incisal table. You can't see it on camera, but take my word for it. I'm looking at about 1/4 millimeter of a vertical opening now between this tooth and everything else, which is good. That's what I'm looking for. I'm just going to chill the wax a little bit with the air nozzle. And I'm going to take some articulating paper. So basically what I did, I took some articulating paper and I cut it down in half. I don't like working with thick strips like this. This is way too thick. So you can take a paper like this or take the back side, which is straight, and cut just a thin strip so you can check each tooth individually without making a whole lot of mess with the articulating paper. All right, so gently, we're going to tap. And there you can see a little imprint of the articulating paper where it needs to be reduced. And hopefully we've elevated the tooth just enough to reduce a little bit and provide a better intercuspation or maximizing the centric contact without destroying all of the anatomy. So I'm going to go back. Well, that's pretty close. Buccal overjet looks good. It looks like the buccal cusp tip is falling to the upper central fossa. So feeling good right now. Let's do that one more time. And again, there's a bit of a distal contact here. And now I can hear my pin coming together. That means I'm back to where I started. Okay, the next tooth, pretty much the same, a little bit easier because I don't have to worry about the wire anymore. You can somewhat guesstimate where this tooth is going to go based on the marginal ridges. So right about there, so that means I got at least 4 or 5 millimeters worth of support that I have to compensate for. So I'm going to take a little bit of wax, seal it first, and then place some wax, maybe a little bit more, in order to support the tooth at the right vertical height. So we can do the same thing. Incorporate a little bit of selective grinding into the tooth to maximize centric occlusion. Let's see if that works. A little bit high, push it down a bit, just judging by the marginal ridges and by the central fossas, something like that. Maybe correct, maybe not. We'll see in a second. The opposing will tell us. So I'm going to seal this down. And a little bit on the lingual side to ensure that the tooth doesn't move. Bit in here. Just going to air chill that for a sec. And see how that tooth now relates to the opposing as we bring it together. That looks pretty good. I got lucky with that one in terms of the vertical position. And again, this one, I'm about 1 millimeter open versus 1/4 millimeter with the 4-5. So this one, I'm about 1 millimeter open. But if you recall, when we're doing selective grinding, because of the angle, the further back you go, the more you can compensate. So therefore that millimeter opening right now on the 6 versus the 1/4 millimeter opening on the 5 is going to close a whole lot quicker when I start grinding it in. Okay. So I'm just going to let that chill just a little bit more. Make sure that the wax is nice and hard to support the tooth. Again, make sure that you don't have open contact areas between the teeth. Everything is nice and tight. And gently, once more, let's use our articulating paper and see. There we go. I got a little bit of an imprint right here. So we're going to do some selective grinding here and there. Just do it in small increments. So that was the red side of the paper. Now I'm going to switch to the blue side. so I don't get confused between each pass. And that's it. Now you can hear the pin is touching again. So buckle over jet, very nice. Maximum intercuspation, same thing back here. Everything looks good. And now one more tooth. And again, I'm going to use the tooth before just to give me an idea where I'm going with this. And it feels like there's going to be some interference at the distal buccal aspect of the tooth. So I'm going to put on my tapered burr. And I have lots of tooth surface here to work with, so I'm not concerned about over grinding the tooth. So the distal buccal aspect, I'm just going to shave some off from the ridge lap portion of the tooth to prevent the interference. And then once more, it looks like I created a little diastema between here. So this tooth might have moved over. Maybe my wax was not hard enough. So make sure you close that up. Okay, I'll close that up and maybe spot grind if I have to again. Now these are simulation models, so if you end up going past 2/3 of the richer molar pad, don't worry about it when you're doing your project. But ideally on real cases, providing that the opposing has not super erupted, the height of the tooth will end up being 2/3 of the richer molar pad. Okay. So before my wax hardens up, I'm going to place this in an ideal position, just judging by the margins, central fossa, somewhat there, bring it together, and hopefully I'm at the right vertical where my incisal pin is slightly elevated, and it is, but I need to go a little bit more, somewhere there. So I'm looking for at least a 1 millimeter incisal pin opening now with this back tooth with a second molar in order to create adequate centric contact. And it looks like I am. So I'm going to seal this tooth down. Try not to move it. And as I mentioned before, it's quite often you'll find that when you go on to the next tooth, you realize that the tooth before that you worked on needs to be repositioned. And this is the case here now again. And I'll show you what I mean. When I look at tooth number 3/6, it looks like this tooth is slightly towards the lingual. So I want to line up the central fossas a little bit more. I like this position, and hopefully my wax is warm enough to do that. Just to do that. Just a little more alignment of the central fossas. Now I'm going to go back to the 5, and that looks a little off. So I might have to reposition that a little bit. So once you get the whole tooth arrangement on there, the section that you're working with, it gives you a better sense of how everything is lining up. So you might have to go back and tweak things a little bit. which is quite common. Just want to make sure that I have a nice seal between the tooth and the wax. This particular wax is very hard, so it doesn't necessarily adhere to the tooth very well. So I got to get it extra hot. And then I'm just going to go back while I'm here and soften up the wax around the 5 and rotate it a little bit if I can. And try not to move the wire. Remember, there's a wire underneath there that you've sealed down. And I'm going to push it and see if I can pivot that like that. And make sure there's no gaps in between. So now I have a better alignment of my central fossas and the marginal ridges, I think. And hopefully I didn't move things around too much. Looks okay. Pin is open, but let's just see how it looks on the inside. That looks like it's lining up okay. Again, I'm not trying to overclose it. I know there's interference back there somewhere, especially around with the second molar. Not so much here. Second molar, so. All right, that looks pretty good. So before I do any selective grinding, I want to make sure that everything is sealed down. The wax has cooled off underneath. Otherwise, if you're working with warm wax, you're going to start tapping in the bite and the tooth is going to shift on you. So make sure that your wax is adequately cooled down before you start milling in the bite. Okay, I'm just going to air chill this a little bit. Normally I will let this cool a little bit longer, but just for the sake of the video, I'm just going to move ahead a little bit. And I'm going to use the very thin strip of articulating paper. And there we can see a premature contact. Oop, wrong burr. We can see a premature contact on the distal lingual incline of 3/7, so I'm going to take that out. Maybe a little bit here because I shifted this tooth around as well. Now I'm going to reverse back to the red portion of the paper. And now I can see a bit of a contact here because I moved it towards the buccal. Makes sense. And a little bit here and there. You can always use just a piece of gauze with a little bit of wax remover on it, just to clean off any of the articulating paper imprint. And I'm getting close now. I can feel the bite coming a little bit closer together. Don't just spot grind, but more like a bowl effect. Trying to round off any grinding that you do. Very close. I can almost hear the pin wanting to come together. If I tap it hard enough, I can hear it, but it's not there yet. Mostly here, that little spot there. Now let's see that. Definitely. So now I'm back to where I started. So I got nice centric contact. I'm not going to get perfect buckle over jet here because this tooth is so far out of position. That's usually the case with natural teeth. But I got a nice centric intercuspation for the most part. My central fossas are lining up here as well as here. Everything looks symmetrical and back to centric. Now I just want to point out some things here that I cleaned up with my interior tooth arrangement just to get a better view from what we did before. I even cleaned up on the wax on the inside, and everything I think is a nice mirror image of the other side. So in the next video, what we're going to do, we're going to wax this up. We're also going to incorporate a strengthener on the lower model of braided wire. So we're going to take a piece of braided wire like this, and we're going to incorporate it on the lower cast. So by the time we finish the case, that braided wire is embedded within the acrylic base and looks like that. And this provides strength because this here has a very weak point where you can almost see it, I can almost flex it, it could break. But the wire provides a little more resistance and holds things together.